That's probably negative. So. It's still early, so that's not hanging on. What? Oh, yeah. I got the routine at these numbers. You hardly get your Yeah, I remember that. I'm very good.
I mean, it's nice. It's not. Yeah. I don't really know what to do.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is good to see you all. Would someone close the door up there? Thank you so much. All right, housekeeping things to start. As you guys know, what is coming up this Friday? Yes, the quiz. Where should you go to take the quiz? Your quiz section, that's right. Please make sure you know where that is. So Bahar will be administering the quiz. It takes most people 30 to 40 minutes to do the quiz. As you guys know, the review sheet has been up on Canvas and I've been updating it as we go. I'll be updating it more frequently this week to make sure you have as much warning as possible about what's on there. So it will be pretty fully covering everything we've covered in this class up through today. And then there may be a little bit of what we're doing on Wednesday, just because we don't have as much time between our Wednesday class and the quiz, right? Okay, let's see. If you need accommodations regarding time, this course is set up so that you can take your quiz at the DRS Center. If you need extra time, please make sure that you contact them and schedule that so that they know what to expect. Okay? Any questions about the quiz? Who all went to the review session? Great job, guys. Great job. All right. Hopefully that was helpful. Was that helpful to go? Okay, excellent. Excellent. I remember once many years ago being a TA and I had a review session for a class of 50 people and not a single one came. And the curve reflected that. The curve reflected that. And so I was sad. So it's great to see you guys all going. That's wonderful. All right. So we know where we are. We're in our pre-modern Middle East unit. We have a little bit more of that to go. So next week, we'll also be doing pre-modern Middle East and Horn of Africa. We know where the Middle East is by this point and what countries are there. We're starting to get the hang of this. What are some languages spoken in the Middle East? Someone yell one out. Arabic. Another one. Turkish. Farsi.
Assyrian.
Assyrian, Egyptian, Kurdish. Yes, lots of languages and many more that we could mention. All right. So let's remember what we were doing last time, because this is actually foundational for what we're going to talk about today. Last time we were talking about the Hebrew Bible and early Judaism. Do you guys want me to put the lights down, or is it okay like this? We're okay? All right. Let me know if it's hard to see at any point. So last time we were talking about the Hebrew Bible, early Judaism. So what I'd like you to do is tell your neighbor, according to the Hebrew Bible, what does the relationship between God and humans look like? What's a covenant? And why stories of underdogs in the Hebrew Bible? Start with those three questions. Tell your neighbor what you remember or what you think.
So,
Okay, let's see what we thought about this. What does the relationship between God and humans look like, according to what we talked about? Yes.
We're talking about, it's sort of strained in a way, more of like an exchange, like based off of like Adam and Eve and their mistakes. That kind of was like the catalyst for like people need to do as God says, and then good things will happen to them. So it's just, it's not necessarily good, it's more of just a formality and a structure, I guess.
Okay, so you're right. So with Adam and Eve, the relationship broke. Before that, it was a closer relationship. And then after that, in order to try to get back to a closer relationship, God is putting this structure in place of like, this is what you need to do, and this is what I'm going to do in order to make this work. So yes. Yeah.
Is that structure that he's putting in place, is that a covenant?
Yes. Yes, it is. So the covenant is like the structure that's being put in place to try to repair the damage, basically. So yeah, absolutely. Other things about what this relationship looks like. Okay. So a covenant, yes, it's this structure designed to kind of fix this relationship, and it includes kind of who are the parties, here are the things I'm going to do, here are the things you're going to do in order to keep this covenant. And then it will also include curses and blessings. So if someone doesn't keep the covenant, this is what will happen. If someone does keep the covenant, these are the blessings. So what are the good and bad effects of keeping the covenant? So yeah, that's that part. What do you guys remember about stories of the underdogs? Why are there so many stories of underdogs in the Hebrew Bible? What do we think about that? Yes.
It's basically to show, like, no matter what challenge you have, like, no matter how much the odds are stacked up against you, as long as you have faith in God, then they'll.
Yes. So even if you're an underdog, even if you're in a really weak position, if God has chosen to support you and told you to do a thing, you're going to be able to do the thing. So it really is demonstrating God's power in that situation. So you think about David and his brothers, all his older brothers, they're adults, they're going to war, they're big, tall, tough dudes. And David, he's pretty tough but he's also a teenager. He's like 15 and he ends up fighting this giant dude and being successful because God is on his side. Okay, the last question on here has to do with what we talked about with early Judaism. Tell your neighbor what you remember. What's a fence around the Torah? Does anyone remember what that is? Tell your neighbor. It's important for today. Okay. Who can remind us, what is a fence around the Torah? What does that mean? Yes.
Through this sense, the halfway driveway, so not committing certain sins. So like, if you don't want to commit adultery, so you can't shake them. For example, can't shake hands, but when they're another sin, like, might be like, you can shake hands, but you can't.
Okay. Yes. So, does anyone want to add? Yeah.
Like, what was the difference between the Torah and like Hebrew Bible?
This is a great question. So, when we're talking about scholarship on the Hebrew Bible specifically, the Torah is the first 5 books: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. That's where the like covenant with Moses and the 10 Commandments and the civil laws all are. And so it's kind of the law and instruction part. But people also use the term Torah in modern day sometimes to mean just the whole thing. But if you're talking about like what part of the Hebrew Bible is Torah, it's those first 5 books. So it's a wobbly term, which adds to everyone's confusion. Yeah. So you're absolutely right. When you have a fence around the Torah, you have your original law or stipulation from the Hebrew Bible. And then what happens is communities are like, how can we make sure that we don't break this law? We're going to put a fence around it of another law that will keep us from getting close to breaking this law. And then maybe we'll put another one. And you could just keep on adding layers. And you're absolutely right. Depending what sect you're in, the way they do this can be different. So I'll give you another really famous example. The 3rd commandment out of the 10 commandments, which we talked about as the kind of foundation of the covenant last time in the Hebrew Bible, the main one. The 3rd commandment is don't use the name of the Lord your God, shaveh, which is like in a false way, in an empty way. Okay. So you're going to not use his personal name casually. You're not going to use it to swear falsely in a court of law. Okay, so you're going to be careful with how you use his name. So the original law is just be careful about this, right? Well, different sects look at that and are like, how exactly are we going to be careful? How exactly are we going to make sure that we don't transgress this commandment, that we don't break this stipulation? Okay, how can we be sure? And so after the Judean exile, so say late 500s and on BC, there is a growing movement to just not say his personal name at all. Just call him God, just call him Lord. Don't ever actually say his personal name. So what happens is we have this original law, which is be careful when you use his name, and it becomes don't use his name at all. And then by the time you get to the Dead Sea Scrolls community in like the 100s BC, in their particular sect, they have a rule that if you're part of this community and you are reading from the Hebrew Bible during worship services, and you accidentally say the personal name of God instead of substituting God or Lord, they throw you out of the community and you're not allowed to ever come back. Okay, that is a really strong, like what they've done is they've taken the fence, which was just don't say it at all. That way you won't use it in a false or empty way. And then they've been like, that rule right there, that is a live or die one. We're gonna like go to the wall for that one. And so you're thrown out of the community if you're reading the Hebrew Bible and you read his name where it is written in the Hebrew Bible accidentally. So sometimes these can get quite extreme. A lot of times it's just very minor kinds of things around these different laws, and it's not such a like sensational example. But this is basically how putting a fence around the Torah works. Now we remember that after some different stuff happened, the Jews kind of got scattered, right? Around the Roman Empire, they get scattered around the Parthian Empire. And they have these oral traditions. They have all these fences and these discussions about how exactly are we going to keep the Hebrew Bible. Does anyone remember what they did once they're scattered, but they have all these traditions? They're kind of worried maybe they'll lose them. Does anyone remember what they did?
They start writing it down.
Yes, they decided we're going to write these down. So they write them down in a couple of collections. Does anyone remember the name of the first collection, which is like a commentary on how to keep the Hebrew Bible? Yes. Yeah.
Phil told me it's the Mishnah.
Yes, Mishnah. So we have the Mishnah being compiled from the 200s to 400s AD. And then there's the larger commentary on how do we do the Mishnah. So we're adding more fences, more discussion, more commentary. What is that one called? Yes. Talmud, yes. So I'm pretty much 100% gonna ask you about those terms on the quiz. So just keeping that in mind. All right, what are we doing today? We are going to talk about Jesus of Nazareth and the New Testament. So we're going to start out by kind of getting an overview of Jesus' life and kind of what the initial reaction to him was in Judea during the first century AD. And then we're going to do an activity looking at some of the stories he tells and see what he's trying to say with those stories. So we're going to start out by sort of talking about the story of Jesus of Nazareth. So Jesus of Nazareth, as you guys probably know, is the central figure of Christianity and of the New Testament text collection. Just like the Hebrew Bible Old Testament, the New Testament is a collection of smaller books, right? Jesus was born around 6 to 4 BCE and executed around 30 AD. As you can see, the folks who were trying to decide what should be BC dates and what should be AD dates had sort of lost track on when he was actually born, because originally the BC versus AD thing was about when is Jesus born as the like divider, right? Historically. So you can see they kind of lost track of exactly when that was. But this is basically when he's living. So he lived in Judea, which was the area of Judah, and Galilee, up by the Sea of Galilee, a little bit north, while these areas were under the control of the Roman Empire. He is, of course, known primarily from the New Testament, but he's also known from Roman historians like Tacitus, from the later Jewish Talmud, and perhaps from the Jewish historian Josephus. It's kind of complicated. So basically, there's no doubt that he was a real person, although, of course, scholars argue about how well different sources reflect him. Just as a quick overview, the New Testament, as I mentioned, is a collection of many different texts. So the collection basically includes 4 Gospels, which are basically accounts of the life and teachings of Jesus. It also has a further history of the early Christians in the book of Acts. And then it has a whole bunch of letters about how do we apply Jesus' teaching by a whole bunch of different people. The main point that I want you to get from this is most of the people who are writing these books are Jewish people. I think it's sometimes easy to forget that Christianity was originally an offshoot of Judaism. And it's not like they're these totally separate things that evolved separately or something like that. So most of the authors of the New Testament are Jewish. So for example, from the Gospels, Matthew and John are both Jewish. Mark, maybe, we're not really sure. Then Paul, who writes a big chunk of the New Testament, he's a Pharisee from the Jewish community in Asia Minor. John, again, is Jewish. Peter is Jewish. Jacob and Jude are Jewish. And then there's an anonymous author who's clearly Jewish writing the book of the Hebrews. So it's a very Jewish collection. And so we want to understand it within the context of first century Judaism. So let's think a little bit about what you guys read for today. And we'll be kind of coming back and forth from what you read throughout our talk today. What do you guys remember? What's unusual about how Jesus is born? And why do you think this would be important for what he does later? Tell your neighbor.
I know,
There's also. Yeah.
Okay, so according to what we read for today, what's unusual about how Jesus gets born? What's kind of unusual here? Yeah. So he has no human father. His mother has never had sex when she becomes pregnant with him. So in the book of Luke, there's a whole thing about how God like sends an angel to go talk to her and make sure she's okay with this. And she's like, this sounds like a great plan. And so she's really happy about it. Anyway, so this is obviously unusual. This is not normally how one gets pregnant because God comes and is like, you're pregnant now. with my child? That's not usually how this works, right? Why do you think that Matthew is making a point of establishing this right at the beginning of the story? Yeah.
Make it seem like he is the son.
Yes. So they're making a very strong argument in Matthew and in the other gospels as well. Jesus is the Son of God. He's not just another human. He's also God. Okay? So this is really important. It gives him authority to say a lot of things and to kind of call different Jewish religious leaders on the carpet. Like he's some guy from some backwater city in Galilee from everyone else's perspective. They're like, how can you talk to the leaders of the temple or the religious leaders about stuff? How can you yell at them and scold them? Well, if he's the Son of God, then he absolutely has the right to do that, right? So that's going to be really important. And it's also going to be important because at the very end of his life on earth, he also does something that normal people can't do. Does anyone remember what he does at the very end? His time on earth? At the end of what you read? Yeah.
He's put to death on the cross, and by this act conquers death and grants forgiveness and atonement for all of man.
Okay, yes, which is absolutely not something people can do. And then after that, is he still like dead somewhere? What happens next? Yes, he raises himself from the dead. So because he's the Son of God, he can do that. Okay? So it's very much setting up. If this part isn't the case, then the later part of the gospel doesn't work. So Matthew's making sure at the very beginning here's this very important information you need. Okay, so as we go on, around age 30, we see that Jesus starts teaching around Galilee, kind of in the north where he grew up, in Judea, around Jerusalem, and Samaria, which is the area in between the two. I think I have a map in a second. And what's really interesting here is he doesn't go to the Jewish religious leaders of the day for training. He doesn't go to them to kind of get his career launched. So he doesn't go to the people who control the temple in Jerusalem, the Sadducees. He also doesn't go to the Pharisees, who are the people who are kind of most involved in teaching regular people about the Hebrew Bible and how to keep the Torah. He doesn't go to either of those groups of people. Instead, he goes to his cousin, John the Baptizer, who is challenging other religious leaders. What kind of message does this send? What do you guys think? Does he seem like someone who's going to follow the party line as it currently stands in Rome and Judea? Not so much, right? Like the person he goes to get kind of legitimation is his cousin John the Baptizer, who's out baptizing people on the Jordan River and challenging people to repent and believe. And so that's a really interesting place that he starts. Now, Jesus teaches around Judea, Samaria, and Galilee for about 3 years before being executed. His teaching puts him in partial agreement and partial disagreement with the different Jewish sects of the time. A sect, I think we mentioned this last time, but a sect is like a subgroup of a larger group, usually having to do with religion. So a sect with particular beliefs or traditions. We often use the word division or denomination or something like that today instead of the word sect, but it's the same idea, really. So during this time period, since we're going to talk about how is he in agreement and how is he in disagreement with other major sects of the time, what are the major religious sects in first century Judea? So these are the 3 main ones that we know of. First up, we have the Sadducees, or Tzaddokim. These are the families that are in control of the temple in Jerusalem, who are acting as priests of the God of the Hebrew Bible. Now, unfortunately, especially after the Romans arrive, the Romans have the idea that the Roman governor should be able to pick who the high priest is. So they can't pick what family, because everyone who's a priest has to be a descendant of Aaron back in the Hebrew Bible. But within that family, the Roman governor is going to pick who gets the job. This unfortunately led to a lot of corruption. So if you read Josephus, who is a Jewish historian of this time period, he goes through all of it, how all these different high priests basically bribe the Roman governor and are like, here, take some shekels. Don't you think I would make a great high priest? I will make sure to give you more shekels. And the Roman governor's like, yeah, sounds good until someone pays me more. It was bad enough that there were even people who were murdering the current high priest in order to become high priest. So these people were not necessarily the shining lights that you want in charge of your religion, okay? And this was very well recognized by the people of Judea at this time. The regular people are very fed up with this, and the other sects are also very upset about this. The next major sect that we have in first century Judea are called the Pharisees or Hasidim. Basically, this sect believed that the Sadducees who were in charge of the temple, they're just unacceptable. They're completely corrupt. But because of the way the covenant is set up in the Hebrew Bible, we still have to support the temple. We still need the temple. We still need these people to be priests at the temple, even though they're terrible. We still need the temple to be close to God. They also believed that everybody should learn as much about the whole Hebrew Bible as possible, as well as all of their oral traditions and fences that went with the tradition. In particular, they wanted people to have this learning because they believed that the Messiah, we'll talk about what that term is in a second, the Messiah would be coming soon, and they also believed the end of the world would be coming soon. So you needed to get ready for this. The third group is the Essenes. The Essenes, basically, they believed the temple is completely corrupt. It's not doing any good for anybody. The priesthood is just such a mess. So we can't use the temple in order to repair our relationship with God. We can't. So they thought we have to come up with other things that we can do in order to get close to God and, once again, prepare for the coming of one or more messiahs and the end of the world. Okay? So this is these are the three main religious groups that are going to be floating around and that Jesus ends up interacting with and who end up being mad at Jesus. Did you have a hand up with a question? No? Okay. Yeah. If anyone ever has a question, make sure you raise your hand high. I am very nearsighted. All right. So what is a Messiah? Both the Pharisees and the Essenes are wanting to get ready for the coming of a Messiah and the end of the world. Messiah, Mashiach, basically just means anointed one. So in the ancient Middle East, you pour oil on someone's head in order to basically set them up for a new important role. So you anoint rulers, you anoint priests, you anoint prophets. Okay? The Hebrew Bible predicts that eventually a Messiah will come who will fix the relationship between the Judeans and their God. So we learned last time that in Genesis, humans break the relationship and break the universe, right? The Hebrew Bible says eventually a Messiah will come and basically fix the relationship between Judeans and their God and also fix all the other things that broke about the universe. So we'll have no more sickness, no more violence, no more war, no more corruption. All of those things are going to be fixed when the Messiah comes. Okay? During this period of history, the first centuries BC and AD, there were a ton of people who showed up who were like, I'm the Messiah. I'm going to fix everything. A number of them are actually mentioned in the New Testament. And if you read Josephus, the Jewish historian, he lists even more of them. So this was a very common thing during this time period that was happening, since most Jews were very clear on the fact they badly needed someone to fix things. Their temple leadership was terribly corrupt. They're under the rule of the Romans who, every 10 years or so would do some massive thing that was like religiously abhorrent to the Jews. They were paying really high taxes, like various problems were happening. So they're like, this is a really bad time. This would be a great time for the Messiah to turn up. We really need that Messiah right now. However, among the different movements expecting the Messiah, there wasn't necessarily a lot of agreement about how you would know that someone was the Messiah. They are all looking at different prophecies in the Hebrew Bible and being like, okay, this is what the Hebrew Bible says about it, but how do we interpret that? How do we put it together? What order do things happen in? How are we going to be sure that it's the Messiah? What exactly are they going to do? And so there was a lot of disagreement, although most of them did think that the Messiah would get rid of the Romans. Now, we've talked about our three sects, the Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes. And basically, there's a lot of discussion that Jesus has with these groups of people, particularly the Pharisees and Sadducees, during his time of teaching. So we're going to look at some examples and see why they had problems with him, which is what eventually led to his being executed. They did not all have the same problems with him, just FYI. So the biggest thing that none of them were happy about is the fact that he says, I am the literal Son of God. God up in heaven, that is my literal Father. No metaphors here. He is my actual Father. And he also says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Just to be clear, what problems would the religious leaders of these Jewish sects have with this? Why would this be problematic? Yes.
Take away some of their power.
Yeah, it's really taking away a lot of their authority. Absolutely. What else you can add? Yeah.
Well, they were supposed to, they claimed that they had the connection to God, so they were like, there was this thing that happens we have, it was like this show on us.
Yes. So he's saying no one comes to the Father except through me. So the Sadducees over there running the temple are like, excuse you? Aren't we the priests at the temple? Aren't we supposed to be the ones kind of overseeing this situation? He's like, no one comes to the Father except through me. And the Pharisees, who are going around teaching the people and who have the perspective of themselves as the keepers of the Jewish faith, they're like, what do you mean? No one comes to the Father except through me. So they're not going to like this, right? They're not going to go for this. Now, Jesus also shows himself as Messiah in the New Testament. He doesn't just say, I'm the Son of God. He also says, I'm the Messiah. I'm the one who's coming to fix the relationship between humans and God, and as a consequence, fixing all those other things that happened when the universe broke, right? One of the things that he says along with this is that his work as Messiah, once he's been crucified, once he's risen from the dead, this is going to make the temple completely unnecessary. You're not going to need that very central thing anymore. So obviously the Sadducees are not going to be happy. That's their whole power base. The Pharisees, even though they didn't like the Sadducees, they were still very invested in the temple being a thing. And they're like, really? We're not doing that anymore? The Essenes already believed that the temple was a mess, but they had already come up with their own systems for trying to fix the problem, alternative to the temple. So they're also not really going to like this because he's basically telling everybody, you're going to have to change how you think about this and how you do this. So let's think about what is the logic in the New Testament? Why would Jesus coming as Messiah mean they no longer needed the temple? Let me explain this. So as we know from what we talked about last time, Adam's and Eve's disobedience broke the universe and everything else about the universe. According to the Hebrew Bible, every human has then continued breaking the covenant over time. Sometimes the word usually used is sinning, okay, if you guys are familiar with that term, and thus continuing to break themselves and the world and their relationship with God. Because of the way the covenant is set up, if you break the covenant, you receive consequences. You receive the covenant curses, right, for breaking it. So in the Hebrew Bible, the way God kind of got a workaround for this is he had people sacrifice animals at the temple, basically as a way of both picturing the consequences and taking on the consequences of breaking the covenant, basically to signal that to people, that there is this very serious consequence when you break the covenant. However, by this point in time, by the time of the New Testament, all the Jewish sects had realized this system has serious problems. There are things that are not being fixed by just doing animal sacrifices at the temple. So a lot of the groups are like, hey, if the priests are super corrupt and are worshiping Greek gods on the side and are skipping out on the evening offering to go hang out at the Greek gymnasium and watch people wrestle naked, like, do we think the temple is working? Are we sure the temple is still working? That's an actual complaint that they had about the priests, that they would skip out on the evening offering to go to the Greek gymnasium and watch wrestling. Like, okay. And also, they've also recognized that the system doesn't actually change the way people are behaving, and it doesn't seem to be permanently fixing the relationship between humans and God. So some things are not necessarily working at this time. So within the New Testament, then, Jesus is presented as a Messiah who can fix these issues regarding the temple. So he basically perfectly keeps the covenant for his entire life. He never does a single thing that's against the covenant in the Hebrew Bible. So he never sins. He's completely innocent. He then prophesies that he's going to act as basically as a sacrifice. The same way in the Hebrew Bible, they would sacrifice animals, he's going to act as a sacrifice. And since he's both human and God, he has the capacity to take on all the consequences for covenant breaking of the people who follow him. Okay? He also prophesies that he will raise himself from the dead, because again, Son of God, he has the capacity to do that. And he will thus be able to gift life and righteousness to all those who follow him. So I think you guys can probably imagine why a lot of Jewish religious leaders would find this threatening, but what would be the issue here? If you were an ancient Jewish religious leader, how would you feel about this? Now, some of them did actually, quite a few of them actually did convert to Christianity, but a lot of them were very much against this. So why would they be against this? Tell your neighbor at least one thing that they would find troubling about this.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, yeah. Okay, like, oh, very so that is usually most of the words. They'll found, that's so. Very much so. Really says, then there's a fashion, I think, by, even family, feels like, fans, they're about to. How good, yeah. That's always been on the facility. Something.
What's something you talked about that Jewish religious leaders of this day would find? Yeah.
From, their position as a leader is, I don't think they want to move this village.
Yes. So a lot of them are not going to like the fact they're going to lose kind of their position as a religious leader. Yeah. What else? Anything else you see here that? Yeah, Will.
I think the nature of Jesus's policies and his actions happening throughout his life are really just a sort of Damocles over the heads of these religious leaders, because he's purporting to be everything that they are not. And he's also saying, I'm gonna So I think if people, the religious leaders are like, converting, co-opting to his movement, they're probably seeing him, Jesus, as the end of their movements.
Yes.
As a conflict that they're going to have to resolve.
Yes. So they're very much like, this guy is the competition. Like, he's using the Hebrew Bible as a base, just as we do. But what he wants to do, what's going to happen in the future is going to be so different if people go with this instead of traditional Judaism. So yes. There are also other ways in which Jesus was in conflict with these various groups. Let's look at, I think I have two examples here. And this is conflict to smaller and greater extents depending on which sect you were part of. So here is one very important thing that Jesus says kind of over and over again. For there is no distinction between Jew and Greek. The word Greek is being used for any non-Jew here. For there is no distinction between Jew and Greek, for the same Lord God is Lord of all, bestowing his riches on all who call on him. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. So what is Jesus's main point here? What do you think his main point is that he's making? Yes?
There's no like ethnic or like blood basis for who can enter heaven or adhere to religion.
Yes, absolutely. He's like, it doesn't matter if you're Jewish by ancestry or not, you can still believe in this God, you can still have the rewards of that, you can still go to heaven. Yes, absolutely. Now, depending on which sect you were in, this would be threatening to greater or lesser extents. So the Sadducees would kind of look at this and be like, sure, fine, doesn't really matter. Like, they were fine with worshiping Zeus instead of the God of the Hebrew Bible, so they're not going to really have a problem with it. The Pharisees are going to be like, okay, like I get this to some extent, because they very much were saying people who were non-Jewish could enter in and become Jewish, but they did have kind of a lot of hoops you had to jump through, a lot of extra hoops you had to jump through in order to do that. And even if you did become a Jewish adherent, you were still not necessarily allowed to even go in the synagogue. And you certainly weren't allowed in the temple. So even if you believe in the God of the Hebrew Bible, you still can't go in the temple. You may well not be able to even go in the synagogue. But you can still, have other benefits. So they're like, sort of, but there is a distinction. They're making a distinction, but they would agree the same Lord is Lord of all. The Essenes would look at this and they'd be like, absolutely not. Not even all Jews are acceptable. We're not having this. Absolutely no non-Jews allowed. So they would have a really serious problem with this. So this was something Jesus said that some of the people in the religious community would be like, no, we're not okay with it. Here's another example. So here, let me read you this, and I want you to think about what is the conflict that Jesus is having, particularly here with the Pharisees. Then Pharisees and scribes came to Jesus from Jerusalem and said, "Why do your disciples break the traditions of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat." He answered them, "And why do you break God's commands for the sake of your tradition? You hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy of you when he said, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching his law, the commandments of men.'" What's the basic conflict going on here? Can anyone tell? Yeah.
The Pharisees are like emphasizing the importance of like tradition or accepted tradition that was passed down from the elders to the current generation. But Jesus says, you know, the only law that we can afford ourselves is the laws given to us by God. So, you know, why are you, confusing yourself with all of this sectarian, like, it's not useful. It's not right.
Yes. So this is going back, oh, I already erased it, to our fence around the Torah issue. The Pharisees are like, "You're not keeping our fences. You're not keeping the fences that we've placed around the Torah to protect it." So they had a whole set of laws about purity and how do you stay pure and how are you going to wash your hands before you eat and all these things in a particular way as part of this tradition that they had. And Jesus is like, "You are breaking the actual laws of the Hebrew Bible in order to keep some of the fences in your tradition." He's saying you can only go with what's in the actual Hebrew Bible. He's basically rejecting their whole oral tradition. He's like, we can't get confused, get caught up in that. So they're obviously not going to be happy about this, right? They're not going to be happy about this at all. The Essenes also have a very rich oral tradition. They're not going to be happy about this. Even the Sadducees have an oral tradition, although they don't usually like push it on people. So they're also going to find this offensive. So he's telling everybody, throw out the oral tradition. So none of the religious leaders are going to be happy with him now. Okay? So he actually does something different instead. So if we think back to our fence around the Torah issue, say that our original law is no murder. That's one of the 10 Commandments, okay? If you're in one of the sort of religious sects, you might put fences around this and say things like, don't roll with people, or I don't know what all is in there. But there are quite a few tractates that address this in one way or another, where there would be all these fences to like make sure you don't murder somebody. Okay. That's how usually the first century Jews would handle this kind of problem. But this is what Jesus does, and I want you to think about how is this different than putting a fence around the Torah. According to Matthew 5, Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'You shall not murder,' and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with someone else will be subject to judgment. For example, anyone who says to someone, 'You,' is answerable to the court, and anyone who says, 'You idiot,' will be in danger of the fires of hell. Therefore, if you're offering your sacrifice at the altar and remember someone has something against you, leave your gift in front of the altar and first go and be reconciled to them, and then come and offer your gift." So how is what he is saying different? How is what he is saying different? Tell your neighbor what you think.
I think she was thing like
After.
Yeah, like, this isn't like also well, it sounds. That's just very, very close to it. I guess it's.
Actually, that is. That is like.
Okay, what do you guys think? What is Jesus's move that's like a different way of approaching the problem? Like, what is different about what he's doing? Caleb.
Well, in the Hebrew Bible, they are in the commentaries, they say these acts don't do them so you do not transgress the greater law. Jesus is saying, change who you are and how you view the world, and then you will not break the moral law.
Yes. So both approaches are designed to keep you from breaking the covenant. They're both designed to keep you from breaking this no murder. But even though the Jewish tradition is like the ultimate goal is they want you to have the correct heart attitude, generally most of your offenses, they're going to be these outward behavioral things. They're like, okay, what behaviors can we avoid in order to make sure that we don't break this law? Whereas what Jesus is doing is he's saying, take it inward into the heart and say, get at the root of the problem. Why do you murder people? You murder people because you're really angry with them and you want to kill them. And so he's like, okay, so the root of the problem is the being angry enough with them to want to kill them. So let's get at that. So that's kind of the direction that he's going with this. So you can imagine why these religious groups are not happy with him, right? Like he's like, throw away all the oral tradition of the past 500 years, and instead we're going to try this alternate approach, okay? So, just to recap, what are some of the problems the Jewish leaders had with Jesus? Just really quick. What do you remember? Yeah.
Undermines their authority.
Yes, undermining their authority. What else? Yeah. So if he's saying he's son of God, if that's not true, that's absolute blasphemy. And they're like, okay, we need to get rid of this guy. Yeah. What else? Yeah. Throwing out their traditions. Yes, absolutely. And someone give me one more. What was the one before the oral tradition that we talked about? Who can be part of this religious community? Who can be part of it? So no distinction between Jew and Greek, right? So even the Pharisees would make a distinction. They do want Greeks to become Jewish, but you can't become like fully Jewish. You can't become first-class Jewish. So they still make that distinction. And Jesus is just like, no distinction. There's no distinction. Everybody can have the same access to God. Yeah. So, and that kind of statement at a moment in time where Jewish identity was under threat from within and without, and they were under so much pressure and being persecuted, someone coming along and wanting to dissolve some of the most important things that made Jewish identity unique, they're not going to be happy about that either, right? Okay, any questions about what we've talked about so far? You guys got it? Understand the logic? Okay. Let us take our break until 2:35. All right. So let's talk a bit about the stories Jesus tells. Well, if the New Testament is all kind of centered around Jesus, it would be nice to know what kind of person he is and what was important to him and what did he want people to understand about God. In order to take a look at this, we're going to look at some of the stories that he tells. Jesus didn't only teach people who already knew a ton about the Hebrew Bible, he also just taught regular large groups of people, mostly illiterate, people who are fishermen, who are farm laborers, who are prostitutes, who are, all kinds of the lower areas of Roman Judean society. And he often did this by telling them stories. These stories, called wisdom tales or parables, contain messages about the relationship between humans and God, or about how humans can behave well in God's eyes. So you can think of these stories, they have a moral to them. Okay? So here is a very short example. This is the story of the priceless pearl. Again, the worth of the kingdom of God is like a merchant who was searching for fine pearls, who, when he found one really, really, really nice pearl, went and sold everything that he had in order to buy it. What do you guys think the moral of this story is? What's the message of this story? Tell your neighbor. What point is it trying to make? What do you guys think? What's the moral of this story? What's the main point that he's trying to get across with this story? Yeah, well,
Getting into the kingdom of God.
yes. So being part of the kingdom of God is the most valuable thing. So here we have this merchant and he's searching for fine pearls and he finds a priceless pearl, which is basically like finding the kingdom of God. And he's like, this is worth so much that I'm going to sell absolutely everything else that I have, except for the very shirt on my back, so that I have enough money to buy this, because that's how special and valuable this thing is. So Jesus is really saying the kingdom of God, it's worth sacrificing everything else in order to be part of the kingdom of God. So if that means getting thrown out of your local synagogue, if that means that some local Jewish religious leaders are going to have people beat you up, if that means that you literally sell your house in order to follow me and listen to my teaching, it's worth it. It's worth it. That's kind of the point that he's trying to make with this story. So let's look at our activity. On your activity sheet, I have given you two very famous stories that Jesus tells. Okay? So you're going to find some neighbors and you're going to read the stories. You might want to read the first story and then do those questions, then read the second story, do those questions. That might work better. And do the best you can to think about what do you think Jesus' original audience would have found surprising or exciting about the way he was presenting the story? What do you think is the main message of the story? And what do you think this tells you about what kind of person Jesus is and what he wants people to understand about God? So go ahead and work on that for a while, and then at the end after a while, we'll come back together and talk about it.
I was gonna say it's not fair, it's not fair.
I just did.
Right. Right.
Bring someone's interest in starting.
The person who's got some coverage, I think that they I think like the side just like that you guys like shaking.
Welcome to state.
Yeah,
Okay, let's talk about this a little bit. Let's start with the first story. As you guys can see, the context in which Jesus tells the story is always pretty important. What is the context in which he tells this story of the Good Samaritan? Like, why does he tell this story right now? What do you guys think? Yeah.
He's like looking currently, but like to like so like people who would follow him. And one of them like just has a question about things.
Yes, so he's out preaching in public to people, and this particular expert in the Jewish law, so probably a Pharisee is what we're talking about, comes and stands up to test him. He's trying to pose him a difficult question. So he's like, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus is like, you're right that it's to love the Lord your God and to love your neighbor as yourself. Do this and you will live. But then we get this really interesting wording here. The expert wants to justify himself. So he wants to make sure he ends up on the right side of the answer of this question. He's like, so who's my neighbor? Who is my neighbor that I have to treat just as well as myself? Who exactly is that? So then Jesus tells this story. What basically happens in this story? Yeah.
A guy gets robbed and he gets passed up by both a priest and a Levite, but then some guy from Samaria comes across him and he basically helps him out and gives him what he has and lets him stay at a lodging building.
Yes. So it's the story of this guy who gets beaten up and a bunch of people pass by and just let him lie there beaten up on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere. But then a guy comes along and treats his wounds and pays for him to stay at an ancient hotel, basically. So in order to fully understand the story, we need to know who the Samaritans are. So I've drawn a little map for us. So if we're here in Canaan, this area here is Idumea, Judea, Samaria. This was one kind of province under a Roman official. And then Galilee and Perea were under one of the Herods. They're under a different official, okay? So if we're looking at this area, Judea, centered around Jerusalem, is kind of the area where a lot of traditional Jewish people live. A lot of them also live up in Galilee. So the people who live in Judea, who offer sacrifices at the temple, who are getting teaching from the Pharisees, who can trace their ancestry back to the Jews who used to live in Judah hundreds of years ago. According to the first century historian Josephus, these are like the first class Jewish people. Okay. Then down here in Idumea, there are people, they are descended from Jewish people. They're a little shaky on exactly how to follow the Hebrew Bible. So they're, according to Josephus, kind of like second class in terms of Jewish religion. And then we have the Samaritans. So the Samaritans who live in this area, Samaria. Now, there's a whole complicated history of why things ended up like this. But the Sumerians are considered to be people with a little bit of Jewish ancestry who are basically worse than Romans because they're considered to be like religious traitors, basically. So they have rejected the temple in Jerusalem for their own temple in Samaria. They do still worship the God of the Hebrew Bible, but they reject quite a lot of the Hebrew Bible. They only keep the original 5 books. And they've also had a number of other conflicts with the Jews in Jerusalem over the past few hundred years. And it's just gotten to be like, there's a lot of bad blood at this point. It's just a lot of bad blood. So for the Jews of this time period, they tended to have a really negative view of Samaritans. Like, there's nobody worse in the world than Samaritans, basically. So, knowing that, what do you guys think is the main message of this story? What do you think? What is Jesus trying to say? Yeah.
That, it doesn't matter your location, your background, where you're from, as long as you do good for others, God will know.
Yes. So even though this person is a Samaritan, who most of the Jews of the day would be like, oh, they're kind of unclean. They don't keep the covenant correctly. They're like religiously, we don't like them. Politically, we also don't like them. Jesus, who was the good person in this story? The Samaritan. Who were not good people in this story? The priest, the Levite. Levites were like the support staff of the temple. Okay. So the people that you would most expect to show kindness to others in order to keep the covenant, they don't do it. They're like, we don't want to deal with this. But instead, the Samaritan comes and he sacrificially is paying 2 denarii, which is quite a lot of money. So we're talking multiple days of work worth. He's paying for this guy to stay at an inn probably for multiple days until he comes back. And he's like, just put it on my tab if you need more money on this. So this is quite shocking, right? This is quite a shocking story. So what do you guys think? Anything else in this story that jumped out at you as surprising or exciting or shocking? Yeah.
That the priest didn't help, that's the first thing. I think most people at the time would be inclined to believe that the priest should, help the tribe, right? But he's the first person to refuse to do that.
Yes. Yes. So that would be very shocking. Absolutely. Anything else? Yes.
You go through the Jewish traditional route of your response of like, oh, I'm just gonna not do these bad actions, but be with God. Doesn't really work. You should be like, oh, I am like a godly person, so that.
Okay, yes. So actual positive actions of generosity and kindness are the way you want to go, and not necessarily like the priest is probably looking at this guy and being like, this guy is probably unclean. He might not even be Jewish. I don't really want to touch him, then I'm going to be unclean, you know, because of the fences around the tradition. I don't want to really deal with that. So I'm just going to leave him there for somebody else to deal with. And the Samaritan does indeed. What does this story tell you about how Jesus thinks the universe works? Is it a weird question? Yeah.
It's a lot more of the internal, like the moral side of things. It's more important to do what is right than what the letter of the law is saying to do. It's more important to be a good person, be one with God in spirit, than just to follow every single little codices that human beings have written.
Okay, so it's more important to be actively a good person. Yeah. Yes.
To build on that, you know, we see that Jesus places more importance on the sort of doing positive acts rather than avoiding negative ones. In the Old Testament, you have these rules like don't steal, don't murder, don't covet, you know, your neighbor's stuff, you know, stuff like that, right? Don't do these bad things. But Jesus says the way that you will get into heaven is not just by avoiding bad things, but also doing right by other people, even when you don't think it's going to benefit you.
Yes. So the way to be a good person is not just not doing the bad things, it's doing the good things. Yes, absolutely. All right. Well, what about then we have this little kind of transitional story about the 100 sheep, right? The 100 sheep. What did you guys think? What was the main point of this little story about the 100 sheep? Yes. So in the next story, the prodigal son, yes. Yeah, we're on the sheep one, I'm sorry. Yeah, in the little sheep story, what did you guys think was the main point? Yeah.
The sinners were so-called lost sheep. Jesus was
Yes. So we have this context where the tax collectors and sinners, basically people who were considered to be habitually breaking the covenant. So people who were considered to be unclean, prostitutes, people with unclean jobs, these people are gathering around to hear Jesus. And so the Pharisees are like, why is this guy saying he's a religious leader and then he's hanging out with people who have all these problems, right? Why is he doing that? And then we get this story where it's basically showing the value of a lost sheep. Jesus is saying these people who are living in a really unpleasant way, like they're valuable and we really want them back. Like we care about those people too, not just the people who have always stayed peacefully in the flock, going where they're told, right? Then we have this prodigal son story. What is this story basically about? Do you guys know what the word prodigal means? I feel like it's gotten attached to this story. We've forgotten what the word actually means. You guys know what prodigal means? This is someone who spends a lot of money. Someone who's a spendthrift. Okay. That's literally what prodigal means. What is this story basically about? Yeah.
There's two brothers, there's the oldest and the youngest. The youngest like goes off and basically wastes all of his money that was like his inheritance. While the eldest brother is working hard and like being responsible. And then when the youngest like runs out of money, he comes back asking his father for forgiveness. And then like he's rewarded, there's this big celebration, but then the eldest son is angry because he's like, I've done all of this work. Why haven't I been treated the same way? So
yes. Yes, so we got the story of these two brothers and what goes on with them. So, what do you guys think is the kind of message of this story? Yeah.
I think like no matter what kind of wrongdoings you've done, like as long as you repent, ask for forgiveness, then you'll be rewarded.
Yeah, so absolutely, no matter what you've done, if you repent and ask for forgiveness, God will always accept you back happily. So, like the father in the story seems to be representing God, and then these two sons are representing different ways that people can live their lives, kind of. So you've got this guy who just goes off, he completely blows his inheritance, and he goes back and he's like, I was really bad. I made a lot of stupid choices. And he's like, can you just make me a slave in your house? I know that way I'll live okay. I'll be okay. It won't be great, but it's better than sitting and wishing I could eat the pig feed, you know? And his father is not like, yes, that's all you deserve. He's like, my kid came back. I thought he was dead. And so he's really happy and throws this big party for him. But you're absolutely right. The older brother is like, why did I never get a big party? Like, I've been here this whole time. I'm apparently not that happy that my brother came back. I'm just fixated on the fact I never got this big party. Um, so yeah, this is really interesting. What do you guys think? Who do you think the older brother is meant to represent in this story? Yes.
Probably Pharisees, the ones who follow all the laws.
Yes, this seems to be aimed at these Pharisees. So we know from the setup for the story, the Pharisees are in the audience. This seems to be the setup. Jesus is kind of saying, you guys are like the older brother. You've been there this whole time. You've been doing the right thing, but you're getting mad because we're throwing a party for the sinners and the tax collectors and the prostitutes, that we're happy to have them be part of the group. And you're just like, I also want a party. And why do they get a party? And so, how do you think the Pharisees are going to feel about this? Probably not very happy. Yeah. Okay. So in our last couple of minutes, what happens to Jesus? What happens? Does he live happily to a ripe old age? What happens to him? Crucifixion. He is executed. So the religious leaders basically decide he's too disruptive, he needs to die. So they keep him in the religious court all night, but they do not have the right under Roman law to execute him. So they then send him over to Pontius Pilatus, who is the Roman governor. And they're like, hey, do us a favor, kill this guy. He's being seditious against Caesar by saying he's the king of the Jews or whatever. And so Pilate is kind of skeptical about this, but ultimately he's like, all right, I can do you this favor. And so Jesus gets executed by crucifixion, which is very unpleasant. Then after his crucifixion, we get this account. So on the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women who had been following Jesus previously took spices and went to his tomb. So they're going to go and make sure he's all set and spiced and wrapped up to preserve his body, right? And they find that the stone has been rolled away from the tomb and Jesus's body isn't in there. So at first they're like, did somebody steal his body? Like grave robbing was a big problem at this time. They're like, did somebody steal him? But then suddenly two men in clothes gleaming like lightning stood beside them. And the men said, why are you looking for the living among the dead? So Jesus is alive. He's not here. He has risen. Remember that he told you before that he's going to be crucified and on the third day be raised again. And then they remember his words. And then later, Jesus turns up among the disciples. And at first they're freaked out. They're like, there is a ghost in here. Why is there a ghost of Jesus in here? He's like, I'm not a ghost, give me some fish. And he like eats some fish, and they're like, oh, you're alive. You can eat fish. So then he explains to them all this stuff from the Hebrew Bible that he's like, these things in the Hebrew Bible were all prophecies telling how I was going to do this. All right. So that's kind of our story that we have for Jesus. So please make sure that your name is on your handout. And you can drop that off down here on the box. You are welcome. See you next time.
Yes. Use about, I'll never.